Well, hi everyone, D'Anthony Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Weyes album, and In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. This is a brand new LP from singer and songwriter Natalie Merring, aka Weyes, whose recent forays into more of a Baroque pop style led to this project getting more attention and acclaim than it ever has. In 2019, she reached a beautiful peak of artistry with this sound on the record Titanic Rising, not just one of the best albums of that year, but one of the prettiest albums of the decade. So of course, I'm excited to hear a follow-up. Also excited to hear that Natalie is more or less doubling down on this sound with this LP, with sparkling and shimmering beds of piano, strings, and guitar that sound like they are straight out of the 70s, obviously making familiar nods to influences that were pretty prominent on the last LP, like Joni Mitchell, and it's also not surprising to see names and faces like Jonathan Rado in the mix on the production end, not just because of the fact that he was involved in the last LP, but his track record with helping other musicians pull from this era as well, Father John Misty being one. Now, just like with Titanic Rising, Hearts Aglow is a pretty standard 10-track experience with an interlude or two, landing within that 40 to 50 minute range. Really feels like Natalie is digging for gold in pretty much the same spot all over again, and I would say her labor is mostly fruitful given some of the great highlights here. There's Children of the Empire, which is a jaunty piano ballad loaded with beautiful melodies and string work, a lot of compositional peaks too, like the organ arpeggios that pop in, or the rushes of vocal harmonies that hit here and there. The big finish toward the end where Natalie shows off her vocal chops a little bit, as well as the little Baroque string outro, all fantastic. The Worst Is Done is a smooth and cheeky, bittersweet reflection on the hell the world has gone through over the past several years, really since the last Weyes record. Some would say at this point the worst is done, as she says in the track, but she does not agree. She thinks it's just kind of getting started, which frankly I think is the more sensible position to take at this point. I also think the line where she says she didn't think we'd all lean into hyper-isolation, that's one of the most shocking bits and realizations on this entire record. God Turned Me Into a Flower was another highlight for me, which I thought was an ambient pop stunner, where Natalie's spotlit vocals soar over these droning synthscapes. There's lots of meditative, repetitive leads and building harmonies. Not exactly the direct and tuneful experience of many songs from the last LP, some of the best highlights from this LP, but still show-stopping in its own way, especially with its effect-heavy outro that makes the whole song sound like it's taking place in some kind of dream rainforest. And while starting in a more formal song fashion, the track Hearts Aglow also hits a really hypnotic stride. The longer it goes on, the more it builds, and the more entrancing it all becomes. The major fault of this LP overall that I found is that Natalie doesn't really bring her best crop of songs, even if the production on the record is consistently impressive from track to track to track. The opener on the LP I think has a pretty strong beginning. Between its beckoning vocals and simple pianos, there's an earnestness to it that I enjoy a lot, along the lines of John Lennon's Imagine. But the song structure from here leaves a lot to be desired, because we kind of hear a lot of variations on this part A section, but not really a part B that contrasts or transitions hard enough that it feels like the song is actually progressing. Opting instead for widening the instrumental palette and kind of coming up with some background variations here and there, which is a strategy, but in my opinion, not enough of a change-up to make this track worth the length that it lasts. Meanwhile, Grapevine is a more acoustic-driven cut with some pretty touches of bells and synths here and there, some overpowering strings too. It's a lot to pull apart, but honestly, the vocal melodies that Natalie brings to the table are kind of the last thing on my mind. Like at this track, we're completely stripped back. Would I be as enamored with it as I am with all of its layers intact? Not really. Then there's Twin Flame, which is maybe the biggest head scratcher on the entire LP, because between its thin guitars, its drum machines, and layers of atmosphere, it kind of just sounds like a bad beach house impression. And not so bad that it's unlistenable, but it does feel like it's falling short of something that it's obviously trying to copy. Then there's the closer, A Given Thing, which is more of a meditative cut than it is a proper song, and in my opinion, sort of an unearned one, because it's not like the track list has been wall-to-wall bangers up until this point. I don't know what it is exactly that we need to, tone things down and get really repetitive to reflect on. For sure, lyrically speaking, I do appreciate the way the track ties up some of its themes of love, but outside of those comments, I don't really get too much more out of the track. For me, this Weyes Blood record, while it is as impressive as Titanic Rising in many respects, I just don't think it really brought everything it could on the songwriting front. The record does bring good production and performances to the table, as well as some interesting lyrics and themes. Of course, some great highlights as well, but the focus and dynamics of the songs at the core of all these tracks just vary too much in quality across the record. You really don't know what you're getting from track to track. It kind of jumps around a bit too much. You could get a stellar ballad with lavish Baroque instrumentation, lots of cool lyrical and instrumental highlights that pop off throughout, but then there's other cuts that feel like one-dimensional meditations that get old very fast. At best, they're kind of pleasant while they're on. And while that's not the worst thing this record could be, it just doesn't really put it on the level of Titanic Rising, in my opinion. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this one. Tran. Zishin, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano. Weyes Blood. Forever.